What's up guys, this is Jan for Chess24. This video we cover probably the biggest heavyweight battle the chess world currently has to offer. Magnus Carlsen, world number 1, world champion, faces Levon Aronian, world number 2 in the live rating list. The man who already won 2 super tournaments in the year 2017, the Granca Chess Classic and the Norway Chess. And he has his sights on yet another victory, because going into this final round, Levon Aronian is leading the Sinquefield Cup, shared with Vishy Anand, who we see here as well, and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, while Magnus Carlsen, the world champion, is half a point behind. So in order to have any chances to win the tournament, Magnus Carlsen has to win his game with the white pieces. And let's jump straight into the action. 1 e4 played by the world champion. e5 is the move Aronian chooses pretty much exclusively. After knight f3, knight c6, bishop to b5. No Italian this time around. Aronian goes for his main weapon, the move a6. He used to alternate here between the Berlin and a6, but recently he's shown a slight preference for a6, bishop a4, knight f6, introducing the joys of the martial attack and its related lines that curiously Magnus Carlsen also used in his world championship match versus Sergei Karjakin with the black pieces. So both players probably know quite a bit about the lines that are about to happen. Rook to e1 played by Carlsen, the main move in the match. He faced a lot of 6 d3 by Karjakin. This time around he goes for rook e1, b5, bishop b3, short castles. Aronian issues the invitation to play the marshal c3 d5, where he has a lot of experience and has shown time and again that black's defenses are holding here. Therefore, Carlsen decides not to test him in this business, but instead plays one of the 2 main alternatives, the move 8a4 here, which, in my opinion, of course that could change, is currently more critical than the move 8a3 that was played by Karjakin twice in the World Championship match. With a4, White asks Black a slightly awkward question to answer, which is, what are you planning to do about your pawn on b5? Of course, you cannot allow a takes b5, followed by rook takes a8, winning a rook. Therefore, you have to address this threat. And there's 3 ways to do so. Bishop b7 is a move that Carlsen has played himself once in a while, but it does have the drawback that after d3, this bishop on b7 is not exactly well placed. Of course, the game continues, and you could make a case for d6, even d5. Your rook e8, I believe, is a move Carlsen has also played, but this bishop is not ideal on b7. Rook b8 is one way to keep this bishop on this diagonal, but then after a b, we have given up the a file without putting up much of a fight. Therefore, this move is not very popular either. And that leaves us with the move that Aronian chooses, the most popular move at a high level, the move b5 to b4. Weakens the c4 square a bit, but keeps the bishop on the right track and does not give up the fight for the a file. White has 3 main moves here, d4, d3, and the move played in the game a5. This is a little subtlety to start with a5 instead of d3, because after d3, d6, a5, we would transpose to the game, but by going for that move order, Black allows the option d3, bishop to c5, which looks a bit weird, but is a move after d3. While after a5, if you were to play bishop c5 now White can go c3 and try to go d4 in one go, which makes this a little harder to justify. After a5, Aronian goes for the main move, the move d6. All of this is still well known to theory, nothing new here. Aronian, when he was younger, he once played the more aggressive line d5, e takes d5, and e4. But I believe modern computers show that this does not quite work. Therefore, no surprise that Aronian goes for the more solid move in this game. Plays the move d6. After d3, the move bishop to e6. We have reached a well-known tabia that has been played on and off at the highest level for quite a bit. When people started doing this, they would pretty much exclusively play the move knight bd2, and then after something like rook b8, play knight to c4 or bishop c4 with a very slow maneuvering battle. But a couple of things changed in understanding this line. First of all, it was shown that after knight bd2, bishop takes b3. It's actually a pretty good move. Knight takes b3, rook to e8, and Black just wants to go h6, bishop f8, d5, equalize the chances. I believe it was Peter Svidler who did this first. Got a pretty decent position. Therefore, Knight b2, bishop takes b3 has been put on the map as a line. More importantly, white players have started to appreciate this structure after bishop takes e6, f takes e6, more and more as a structure. That gives chances for white. I believe one reason why people started doing this more is that it happens a lot in the Italian game. Something like this, currently very trendy line. Don't quote me on the move order. But these positions have become more and more common, and white has had some pretty decent success in these things. For example, in this tournament, Sergei Kayakin won this very structure, I think this very position, against Wesley. So therefore, it has become more common to take on e6 and inflict black with these double pawns in other lines as well. Therefore, it's only logical to start looking at it more closely here. Of course, these pawns have some advantages. They cover a lot of squares in the center, but they also do have some drawbacks. The king is permanently a little weakened now that the f7 pawn has disappeared, and more importantly, if the center ever gets open one way or the other, let's say white gets c3 and d4, black faces some unpleasant questions. If he wants to play with isolated e-pawns, if he wants to give up the center, not that pretty. Even if black is first to strike in the center by playing d5, his pawn on e5 will remain eternally weak. Therefore, yeah, it's a tricky structure to play. I'm not saying white is necessarily better here, but I'm saying, yeah, people have started to understand things are not so easy in this structure. Carlsen continues with the move knight bd2. People are still following a game by, for example, well, many games, but for example, a game by Maxim Vachier-Lagrave versus Radek Wojciechek recently played. Maxim Vachier-Lagrave, one of Carlsen's helpers in the World Championship match. Instead of knight b2, another setup that is playable is h3 to prepare bishop e3 and only then determine the knight's fate. Knight b2 played, rook to b8, logical enough, preparing rook b5, attacking the one weakness in the white camp that there is, and white goes c3, keeping his options open with the knight. Still a lot of squares the knight could go to, while at the same time preparing the move d4, which, as I mentioned, is awkward for the black center to face. This is the position where Aronian deviates from Wojciechek's play, who played b rook b5 here, equalized quite comfortably, even got a better position against MVL, but I'm sure Carlsen had something in mind. My computer, for example, says d4 in this position is an interesting move. But Aronian prefers to keep the tension, plays the move queen to e8. Slightly strange looking move, but it is a multi-purpose move. The h5 square is controlled so that black could put a knight here without having to worry. The white has some tricks exploiting the loose position of the knight on h5. The queen from e8 can go to the g6 square, which is a nice square, sometimes fighting against white playing d4. And it could also go to f7 or h5. No, it's less likely. Then on one more plus, the queen covers the c6 knight from e8. Knight to c4 played by Carlsen covers his pawn, and the queen goes to g6, anticipating white d4, wants to put pressure on the e4 pawn. Carlsen plays h3, typical move for these structures as well, just in order to prepare to develop his bishop by going to e3. And Aronian comes up with an interesting idea here. He puts his knight on the d7 square. At first sight, knight to h5 might look more logical to go to f4, but it would only get exchanged there, and after, let's say, takes, rook takes, I have a feeling white is probably a tad better in these structures. Once again, the problems with the light squares and the double e-pawns seem to outweigh the temporary black activity. Still, knight h5 was a serious alternative for sure. But knight d7 is an interesting multi-purpose move. It prepares the knight jump to c5, and it also prepares pushing in the center by going to pawn to d5, while keeping his options open and opening the f5 for the rook. So I like the move knight to d7. Carlsen correctly decides that knight c5 is a bigger threat than d5 and prevents it by going bishop to e3, because now he could just take the knight and then the pawn would drop. Therefore, Aronian goes for plan B, plays the move d5. Not forced, you could also make a move for rook b5, but d5 is very consistent, having played knight to d7. The knight goes back to d2. Of course, you don't want to undouble the black pawns by going ed just yet. Knight cd2. And white is arguing, okay, I lost some time, but d5 also weakened your structure, and you have to determine where you want to put the pieces. Long term I'm better, so do your worst. If you cannot hurt me, I will have an advantage because your center is weak. And Aronian, I believe, commits a small inaccuracy in this position. He goes for the move b takes c3. It's hard for me to explain why this is an inaccuracy. The best way I can put it is Black carries the key to when the b file should be open. Black can play b takes c3 at any juncture, while White can never really avoid b takes c3. White never wants to take on b4. White also never really wants to play c4, especially now that d4 would win a piece. Therefore, Black should only use this trump card to open the b file if there is direct dividends. And in this case, this does not seem to help him, while it does increase White's options as well, because now White can fight for the b file. Queen a4 is also slightly more awkward in some lines than after without bc. So bc3 helps the opponent more than it helps Black. It looks to me like a move like bishop d6, keeping his options open, was a better choice here, when it's hard to say. Is White better? Is the position equal? It's very tricky to play for both sides, but that looked like an option. The computer also mentions the move bishop c5, planning to exchange bishops, and considers the position to be roughly equal as well. Said bc was played, and Aronian decides to use his knight for the c5 square, not the bishop, which, once again, the computer is not a fan of this move because it gives White the chance to transform the position in his favor, and the complications that ensue now seem to favor the world champion, who goes for it by going bishop takes c5. Instead of knight to c5, now bishop d6 or knight f6 were less appealing, or bishop d6 or bishop c5 were less appealing than before. bc. Therefore, having played bc, knight c5 is consistent. But Carlsen goes for takes, bishop takes, and queen to a4, forcing serious complications. The queen attacks this knight on c6. The knight can't easily move because it would, make it much harder to keep the e5 pawn alive. Therefore, Black has to decide what he wants to do. And Aronian is not taken by surprise by this development. Instead, he has a nasty trick up his sleeve, which is the move rook to b2. He leaves his knight hanging and says, do your worst, take it. Should I stop saying do your worst? Nah. And his point is that queen takes c6 actually loses because of bishop takes f2. King takes f2, rook takes d2, and Black wins in every line. For example, king e3, queen h6 check. King doesn't have anywhere to go. Takes, checkmate. Rook e2 does not really improve the situation all that much. Black wins. Therefore, after rook b2, queen takes c6 is not a great idea. There's some more lines, but you can trust me. They're all winning for Black. After queen c6, bishop f2. But Carlsen shows that he has anticipated this and plays a couple of fantastically strong moves that don't look like hammer blows, but they are. Carlsen starts with the move rook e1 to f1. Normally, if you force your pawn to undevelop a rook just to defend this pawn, you feel like you've achieved something. But here, the rest of the position is in White's favor. The structure, the fact that c6 is hanging, so it was really just about extinguishing the Black initiative, defending against the direct threats. And rook f1 does a tremendous job, stopping bishop f2, stopping rook takes d2, covering the weakest spot. Once again, leaving Black with the same problems. Do you want to move the knight, leave the e5 pawn hanging? Do you want to put your queen on a passive square? Then White would just go rook b1, exchange the active rook, slowly but surely take over the initiative. It might be that this was still the best choice Black had. Queen e8, followed by queen d7. Dug in, defend. Not fun, but not over either. Instead, Aronian, true to his style, goes for a much more active and much trickier choice. Knight to a7. He's willing to sacrifice a pawn for active play. And once again, Carlsen has a decision to make if he wants to take it or not to take it. But this time around, he feels that taking the material is the correct course of action, and he takes on e5. Rook ab1 was an alternative, exchanging the active rook. Well, White is also better. But knight takes e5 if you can get away with it, why not grab a central pawn? However, in order to justify this, you have to make a lot of precise moves. Aronian plays the most active move, queen to h6. Targets this knight, knight df3, and knight b5. That was his point. This knight reaches a much better outpost on the c6 square and targets the pawn on c3, which is not easy to defend. For example, if you play the naive rook to c1, then after rook takes f2, white can pretty much resign because this rook drops after rook f2. Queen takes c1. Game over. Therefore, not trivial to defend this pawn. You could of course advance it, but after c4 takes, knight to d4, all the black pieces are very, very active, and it won't be easy at all for white to prove that he's better here, even though he currently has an extra pawn. So this is not a very appealing choice either. Instead, Carlsen plays another fantastically strong move in the same style of rook to f1. Tough to explain for me, but it works. He plays a move rook a e1, covering the e2 square, which will be important after knight takes c3. That in some lines after knight e2 check, you can just take this, and also covering the e4 pawn, so it never is under attack, while at the same time preparing to use the e file for future active endeavors. Very, very strong move. With the tactical justification, of course, that after knight takes c3, which is played in the game, white has the powerful move queen to c6. Takes the bishop, keeps an eye on the a6 pawn, eye on the c7 pawn, eye on the e6 pawn, forces black to play the move bishop to b4. Now his pieces are sort of clumsily placed, defending each other, but also blocking each other. Therefore, you can feel that white might emerge on top here. In this position, Carlsen does not play the computer move, which could give us reasons to criticize him. He does not play the move knight to d7. However, his move is also pretty good, so it's hard to be too critical about it. Knight d7 seems very strong. My best guess is that he did not feel comfortable with the position after rook takes f3, g takes f3, when the white king is also fairly open. But the computer says nothing to worry about. White is better here. For example, queen h3, queen a8, king f7, knight e5, king f6, d4. And there are no threats against the white king that are lethal. Instead, Carlsen plays another move in the same spirit of rook f1, rook e1. What does the opponent want? The opponent wants to go knight e2 check. So let's play king h1. Make sure knight e2 is no longer check. This, in a way, is the theme of this game, this prophylactic thinking. Spot the opponent's threat and find a move that stops it. King h1 is very, very strong, and black remains in trouble, so it's hard to be too critical of this move. Now, if black were to take on a5, this is a pawn you really want to take, but in this case, knight d7 is more or less decisive because of the counterplay. Because the counterplay with rook takes f3 no longer works now that the bishop has lost sight of the f8 square. White can just win by going queen a8 check, king f7, queen f8, king g6, knight e5 check, and the game ends. Therefore, this pawn cannot be touched. Aronian finds the best chance, which is to continue playing forced lines as well. Go d takes e4, d takes e4, knight to e2, no longer check, but still bringing the knight over to the king side, looking for counterplay there. Rook to b1, finally white manages to exchange the active black rook. Rook takes, and the tactics still work in white's favor. For example here, bishop takes a5, queen takes a6, so double attack against both light pieces. Instead, Aronian plays the move bishop d6. It has to be said that Aronian finds fantastic resources in this very difficult position. He keeps making it difficult for white as well to convert his advantage. Here with the bishop on d6, the knight coming to f4. All of a sudden, black with very limited forces can create some serious threats on the king side. Carlsen has to continue being precise. He goes queen takes a6. Knight g4 was another option. Queen takes a6, of course, very, very natural. Targets the knight, picks up an important pawn. Knight to f4, and all of a sudden, black might threaten bishop takes e5, knight takes e5, queen g5. With some nasty threats. For example, if white is careless, goes queen b7. Playing to queen his a pawn. Bishop e5, knight e5, queen g5. Knight g4, blocks, keeps the knight, h5. knight e3, and knight to d3, and the black counterplay. It's at least good enough for a draw. Not even clear if white has a draw here. Therefore, once again, Carlsen figures out what his opponent wants and defends against it by playing the classy move queen to b5. Also clearing the way for the a-pawn, but making sure that bishop e5 is no longer a threat because it can be met with queen takes e5. That also explains Aronian's next move. He goes for the move c5. He really wants to take and then go queen to g5. But Carlsen has correctly evaluated that now he is in time to defend against the threats and advance his a-pawn. Once again, knight g4 was possible, so a6, not the only move. But after a6, bishop takes e5, knight takes e5, queen g5, knight g4, all of this happened in the game. h5, knight e3. The situation is different. This pawn is a little more advanced, and very importantly, there is no knight d3 because the queen from b5 covers that square. Therefore, black has to find some other active option because you can't just wait for the a-pawn to queen and ending the game. The first active move that comes to mind is the move knight takes h3. But after g takes h3, the black initiative is not strong enough. For example, rook takes f2, queen e8 check, king h7, and rook to g1 is key resource when queen e3 loses because of check and checkmate. So you can't do that. Therefore, Aronian, who was low on time, finds a different idea. He sacrifices knight on the g2 square. His point is after knight takes g2, rook takes f2. You're threatening checkmate here, keeping white busy. And if any black piece manages to give a check on h3, things will also become tough for white, who has to play the move rook to g1, covering his knight here. Now, the problem for black is he would like to play queen g3, but it does not work. Once again, white has this defense, covering the h3 pawn and winning. Therefore, Aronian starts by playing the move king to h7, and Carlsen goes for queen to d3, covering his h3 pawn and defending against queen g3. The computer says queen to e8 was also winning, indirectly defending against queen g3 by targeting the pawn on h5. But you need to see some pretty weird lines in order to make that work. For example, queen e5, trying to go rook f3, a7, rook f3, threatening checkmate, knight to f4. This is the key move, and white seems to win after rook takes f4 by going queen g6 followed by a8 queen check, and after queen takes e4. Okay, the lines continue. White wins, but it's by no means trivial. Rook g7. What? Hard to calculate in time trouble. Therefore, Carlsen plays the move queen to d3. More natural move. Since he has an extra piece, he's confident he can defend against all the threats. Aronian goes queen e5, stopping e5 check. And yeah, just trying to keep the position under control, giving Carlsen the chance to go wrong here with his knight on g2 and the rook on g1. Things are still not obvious. If the knight moves, there is a checkmate on h2. If you go a7, then after rook a2, this pawn will not make it to the promised land either. Let's have a look at some video which shows us this key moment and shows that Carlsen almost forgets about the clock here. Look at it. He looks over at the clock. He sees he has 3 seconds left and slightly panics. Plays the move queen to e3. We can see here he's still recovering from that shock. Later on, he would go on to say that he almost lost on time. But queen e3 does not ruin anything, targeting the rook on f2. Aronian also does not have a lot of time left on the clock. But his move is kind of obvious. He goes for rook to a2, keeping an eye on the a-pawn. This is move number 40. Carlsen does not want to let his clock run down again. Goes for, well, was intending to play rook f1 instantly, but then he changes his mind. We see he's a little rattled, but plays queen f4, keeping control of the situation, makes the time control. Aronian would also make it after queen e3, rook a2, queen f4. He realizes the endgames are not much fun, therefore he keeps the queen on the board with queen c3. But after knight to e3, covering the little threat of queen h3, it turns out that black has no further resources to keep his initiative going. If he were to take the pawn on a6, then white would just start attacking himself, queen g5. And if any of the black pawns fall, the knight would immediately join the battle with decisive effect. Therefore, instead of taking on a6, Aronian, probably with a heavy heart, realizes he has to defend against queen g5, goes for queen to f6. His problem is, though, after queen takes f6, not forced but good enough, gf6, that this endgame is lost. Rook to c1. White still has 2 pawns left, and as long as you can't exchange both of these pawns, the extra knight will decide the game. The last trap is rook takes a6, hoping for rook c5, rook a3, and the h3 pawn would fall, making it much harder, if not impossible, to win the game. But of course, you don't have to do that, and Carlsen plays king to g2, preparing to meet rook a3 with king to f3, which pretty much decides the game. Rook a2, rook c2, rook a5, king f3, king g6, h4, nice move, stopping king g5 and fixing this pawn on h5, so you can attack it later, should you feel the need. Rook b5, rook a2, rook b1, rook c2, rook b5, rook c3. Aronian decides to exchange at least one pawn with f5, ef, rook d3. But there is another pawn still remaining that will be very hard to get to. Let's have a look at another piece of video from that game. Here we are after rook to d3. Aronian has seen enough and he offers his hand resigning the game. Both sides don't look overly thrilled, probably still recovering from this very tense battle. But Magnus Carlsen manages to defeat, maybe, it's always hard to say, his closest rival at the moment, Levon Aronian, and win this key game with the white pieces. However, this victory would not be enough to win the tournament, because at the same time, Maxim Vachier-Lagrave won his game against Jan Nepomniachtchi, and therefore Maxim Vachier-Lagrave wins the tournament, finishes with 6 out of 9. Probably the biggest victory for the Frenchman today. Congratulations, Maxim. While Magnus Carlsen finishes with 5.5. A good result. He's probably not happy he didn't win the tournament. The key matchup in the end turned out to be the game between Magnus and Maxim. Check out my video on that game. That was the difference in the end. Vichy Anand, also fantastic event. 5.5 out of 9. Shared second with Magnus Carlsen. While Levon will be unhappy that he lost the last round, but played a great tournament, great chess. Just thinking back to all his white games where he pushed his h-pawn all the way. So Levon Aronian is very much back. Let's see how far he can take it. Thank you guys for watching this video. Hope you enjoyed it. There's more chess to come, of course, in St. Louis. The St. Louis Rapid and Blitz featuring a certain Garry Kasparov is about to start. Starts on Monday, August 14th. So check that one out. Thanks for watching this one. See you guys soon.